Critical Blast, where pop culture gets blasted.
Hello everybody, I'm RJ Carter. I'm here at the Moonrise Hotel in St. Louis, Missouri with TCM's Tim Mankiewicz and Ms. Margaret O'Brien from Meet Me in St. Louis, because we are going to be showing tomorrow night what film?
Meet Me in St. Louis.
Meet Me in St. Louis.
This is sing it now.
This is Margaret's first time. She's been in St. Louis a bunch. First time coming to St. Louis with the specific purpose of screening this movie live for an audience. So that's
And that's what makes it so exciting
Yeah.
for me, to be here in St. Louis and seeing Meet Me in St. Louis.
So welcome back to St. Louis again. We hope you got
Thank you.
some gooey butter cake and some frozen custard. Those are the things we're most known for.
Is that right? I didn't know about the gooey. I've been here many times. I did not know about the gooey butter
You
cake.
gotta get the gooey butter cake,
All right,
toasted
sure.
ravioli, that kind of
Yeah,
thing.
the gooey butter cake sounds like it's probably pretty good for you.
It's excellent for
Yeah.
your cholesterol. It just
Okay.
puts it way up as high as you can get it.
Good. Yeah.
Ms. O'Brien, I wanted to ask you something, because you were just 6 years old when you were starring in
Yes.
Meet Me in St. Louis. Now, historically, child actors, they have three paths they can follow. One is tragedy, one is obscurity, and one is success in their career, which is the path you went down, thankfully. What do you think anchored you so that you were able to not veer off the rails like so many others have done?
Well, what anchored me was my mother. She was a very strong personality, and I almost didn't do Meet Me in St. Louis because I was making very little money. I'd already done 2 big movies, and my mother said, she went into Mr. Mayor's office and said, I want the top salary, which at that time was $5,000 a week for everybody. Clark Gable, that was the top salary. She said, I want this for my daughter. Well, Mr. Mayor could cry better than I could cry when you asked him for money. And he said, oh, I can't do that, I can't do that. I said, well, that's fine. Then we're not gonna do Meet Me in St. Louis. I love New York, my mother's a bit of a gypsy. We're just gonna go off to New York. Now at that time, they had something there that was not really a nice thing. They would have lookalikes. My aunt was put under contract as the lookalike for Lucille Brenner. James Craig was a lookalike for Clark Gable. And they had a little girl that was a lookalike for me. So they said, oh, that's fine, we're gonna put her in the part. My mother said, fine, goodbye. And they had the costumes made for her. They told her family she was going to be in it. They were all set to do it, but the studio was not gonna put her in it. They were gonna come through. If my mother didn't break, they were gonna pay me the $5,000. So they had to tell this little girl's family that she was not gonna be in the movie. And her father worked the lights on the set of Meet Me in St. Louis, and he almost tried to drop a light on me. He had a nervous breakdown over it, and I don't think that family was ever the same. So there was a little bit of a tragedy associated with
You know,
that.
we talked about Judy. I mean, the studios.
Yes.
They played tough, and they
did play tough.
They played mean.
My
and
mother was a little tougher.
Yeah.
So,
The
and
pictures
she
of the
was
contact
pretty.
sport.
My mother was very pretty. She was very exotic, kind of Hedy Lamarr looking, and Mr. Mayor kind of liked those looks. He liked, the Hedy Lamarr look. So he bent.
He
a little
blinked. He
bit.
blinked. So
He bent.
Yeah, that's right.
And so that helped me a lot. And my mother was very strong. She wasn't a stage mother. She was very glamorous and never told people how to do things. But when it came to the money, she did. So I came back and did Meet Me in St. Louis.
Excellent. Now, because of your family's connections in Hollywood, you knew all these people, and when you worked, you'd already done Jane Eyre with Orson Welles. You went on to do Little Women with Elizabeth Taylor. You worked with Bob Hope. Did you ever see any of these people the way the audience people see them, as giants in the industry, or was it just, well, this is a guy I work with, these are people I know?
No, working with Elizabeth and working with Judy, they were like friends. I wasn't looking at them like a movie star. We were just friends, like regular people would be friends among each other.
That's so hard for people who aren't in the industry to relate to, I think,
know.
because it's like, how can you just sit down and eat pizza with that person when they've done this film and that film?
Well, let me add about specifically, it's, the Judy Garland and Elizabeth Taylor, sort of like Margaret. Margaret started younger, but they both, Natalie Wood, he mentioned earlier too, all of those stars, were kids at MGM, were children, and so instantly, I imagine, we know with Judy and Elizabeth too, and Natalie, understood everything that was,
Yes.
I mean, Margaret was Natalie was a contemporary, but the others had been older and were, I think, clearly sympathetic to sort of all the stresses which Margaret brushes over because she's such a trooper, that go with being a child in high value A-list pictures.
And don't forget, when I came in, when Natalie came in, we had the school teachers and the Board of Education had come into the studios because of the Judy
Yeah.
situation, overworked as a child and so forth, and they were very strict. I sometimes wanted to finish a scene, if it was a crying scene, and I'd say to the school teacher, I don't want to do it in the morning. She'd say, no, at 6 o'clock, you are finished.
Right, your
And
day's
it
over.
was wonderful. It really was wonderful.
I had my son watch, he's 11, watch Meet Me in St. Louis the other day, and I said, I want you to tell me all about the film because I have to go interview this lady. So you tell me, you fill me in on the background, just a way to get him to watch it. And I think he watched The Addams Family, because when I asked him, he said, okay, what did the little girl do? He says, well, she chopped off a snowman's head with a snow shovel, and she buried dolls in the cemetery, and she threw flour in some guy's face and said she hated him. Did you have, was it fun doing those kinds of?
Oh, I loved it, especially I love doing the Halloween scene, because Halloween is my favorite time of the year, and I love seeing the pumpkins, and I got to work at night for that scene. I came in late in the afternoon, so I'm working at night. I felt like a grown-up actress. I could work at night, and it was a lot of fun. I love doing that Halloween.
Ben, obviously this is part of TCM's Bring TCM to Your Hometown. In this Meet Me in St. Louis, what other towns would you like to see come out of something serious like this? You want to go to Sparta, Mississippi for Heat of the Night, or?
Sure, of course. I mean, again, and there's no real substantive difference. I mean, in the Heat of the Night, not shot in Mississippi. Meet Me in St. Louis, not shot in St. Louis, not a frame.
It's actually shot in Sparta, Illinois.
That's right. That's right. But then the reason they called it Sparta, Mississippi was because they shot it in Sparta, Illinois. Sidney Poitier, after a brief experience, was not going to go down south to make this movie, totally understandably. Almost any other city. I mean, it's great when a city identifies with a town. We've been to Buffalo, where we screened The Natural, and the Robert Redford movie, not set in Buffalo, but almost all of it shot in Buffalo. Baseball scenes all shot in Buffalo at the old Memorial Stadium. And then we were in Tucson last year, screened Rio Bravo, Howard Hawks' film with John Wayne and Dean Martin and Angie Dickinson, and Angie was in Tucson. And now, St. Louis had a great submission, and Margaret is always eager to help and talk about classic films and help keep them alive, and so she was, it was great that she was willing to come here, but, I'd love to go to almost any city I'd love to go to Oregon and screen, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest and, movies that were shot there. There's so many cities that are instantly associated with a film. I'd love to go to Kansas and do In Cold Blood. It's there's a lot of again, many movies aren't set in the places they are, and that's the magic of movie making. I think it's still hard for people to imagine that they created an entire St. Louis street in Culver City, California, on the MGM lot.
Absolutely. Now, you've done other series as well. You just did a series, we just finished seeing the series that you did on some sports stadiums. Are there any topics do you have any input to the showrunners at TCM, or do you just do what they do?
We have a programming department that largely sets our program. It's all they do, and they're geniuses, because every night on TCM is a little festival. Charlie Tavish, a great friend of mine, runs that department. I have some input because of the who we might be able to get, which can influence programming. So if we're able to get a certain kind of guest to come in, well, then we sort of reassess things and figure out a way to get that guest in to talk about those movies. But the majority of the TCM programming is set by our programming department. And then the things that I care a lot about, I'll sort of, I'll get, if we're going to do a series on college football, if we're going to do a series on baseball, if we're going to do politics, then that's probably, I'm going to push for that.
Okay. Ms. O'Brien, you were 7 years old when they gave you an Oscar. Did that put any kind of pressure on you being so young, saying, oh my gosh, I've just gotten the highest award there is, I've really got to buckle down to top myself now?
No, that didn't seem to make a difference to me. It was just wonderful getting the Oscar, but actually at the time, because I was so young, I was more excited that Bob Hope was giving me the Oscar because I'd seen so many of his movies. I loved Bob Hope, so I ran up and I was, you know, oh, Mr. Hope, thank you. Oh, yeah, I was more interested in Bob Hope. So later years, the Oscar became even more important to me when it was refound, and the Academy presented it to me all over again. So I'm one of the few people that have been presented one Oscar twice.
Very interesting. And of course, you got to see Bob Hope again 20 years later.
Oh, of course.
That was very fun.
Yes.
You know, when most people are well into their retirement, they like to just sit back and do nothing. You're still making pictures.
Oh yes, I did a Christmas film for Hallmark last year.
Yes.
And I still do a lot of it. I have another movie coming out. I love working. I like time to myself, of course, but I still love doing movies and doing different projects.
You've done some very against type movies lately too. I mean, you work with Luciano Barsuglia for doing some Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde.
Yes.
So that's a very fun thing.
I did Tales of the Dark Side, where I was a spider. I love doing unusual. That's what I love about television, because it gave me a chance,
to just branch
when
out.
the studio contracts ended, to play many different characters and grow up with some wonderful new actors that were coming into focus at the time.
Let me just say this about Margaret's answer there. It is remarkable how many great classic stars like Margaret have like retirement that they're not interested in it. They might take a longer vacation every now and again, but they want to keep working. That they made this great art, they made this important art that people care about, and I wouldn't want to give that up, and I don't. And they're still performing at a, they're performing at an incredibly high level. So, I mean, I always, it's a question I ask in almost every Q&A. I go, come on, why don't you retire? And they're always like, retire? Why would I do that? Why on earth would I do that?
When you love what
And
you do.
of course,
stay
you're
with it.
always learning as an actress, and through TCM I learned, because I had not seen some of the Garbo movies.
Yeah.
So I watched her, and maybe I can use that. I just saw Mary Astor in a silent
Oh, right.
movie
Yeah.
where she was sort of in Cairo or something, being whisked off, and I thought, oh, she's so beautiful in that. Oh, I love what she did here. So I learned and keep learning through TCM, and young actors who ask me, how do I do, what do I do? Do I go to acting school? I said, no, just watch TCM. Watch the history
Look at you.
of the movies, and that's how you learn.
Oh, you're the
To
best.
watch the history and see what the different actors and actresses are doing.
Well, we definitely appreciate you coming to St. Louis for the special screening of Meet Me in St. Louis. If you are in town, try to swing by the theaters and see if you can get in on that screening. Probably not going to be full up, I think. But again, we appreciate your time. Thank you so much for visiting with us.
Thank you so much. Nice meeting you.
Ben, thanks.